Hi there, I'm the _twig and I like analysing game rules. One of the first decisions that you make when building a new D&D character is your species. This defines everything from what your character looks like through to a set of abilities that you're going to have for the entire campaign. That's what I'm going to be focusing on in this 2-video mini-series, the features, and I'm going to rank them. This is a tier list, and I'm not going to be making one. I don't think that tier lists are detailed enough for something as important as your species, so I will instead be using one of my patented grids. On the horizontal axis, we have how frequently the species features will activate in a useful way, and on the vertical axis, we'll be tracking how strong those useful activations are. In terms of frequency, we're going from almost certainly on the right, meaning that the species basically always has something to contribute, then to most scenes, meaning that they consistently have useful activations both in and out of combat. Specific scenes, meaning that they focus on a specific type of scenario, such as combat or social encounters. Then most sessions, meaning that it's not really consistent, but you'll likely get at least one useful activation per session. Some sessions, meaning that you're likely to go entire sessions without a useful activation. And finally, very rarely, meaning that you can probably go entire levels without your features being relevant at all. Now, I was talking there about useful activations. There's a big difference between a feature activating and a feature activating in a useful way. Let's say that there was a species that gave you advantage on an attack roll, proficiency bonus times per day. If you use that feature, then that was an activation. But if both dice miss, or the die that you would have rolled first hit, then it wasn't a useful activation. It effectively didn't do anything. Even if the advantage meant that you did hit when you wouldn't have otherwise, if you min-roll 4 damage and the goblin had 5 HP, then that also probably wasn't a useful activation because you didn't get the kill. A feature doesn't just have to be widely applicable to score well here, it also has to have the intended effect. Back to the grid though. The vertical axis is tracking how strong those useful activations are. There's a big difference in effectiveness between getting a free teleport and increasing your carrying capacity. From the top, game warping means that the DM has to actively change how they design encounters. Build defining means that there are certain character builds which would struggle to even exist without these species. Powerful means that they will result in a major swing in your favour or prevent a major catastrophe. Impactful means that the feature will have a noticeable effect but won't materially change the circumstances of the scene. Next, build dependent means that you will need to design your character in a very specific way to make use of the features, but they could potentially be impactful or even powerful. Convenient then means that the benefits of the feature are something that you could probably already do, but they make it easier. Outclassed is for features that you could just get better equivalents of elsewhere. And finally, near useless is for features that I genuinely can't see a good use case for. Also for clarity, I'm only going to be looking at species from 2024 onwards. That's anything from the PHB, the Dhampir, and the species that got added in Lorwyn First Light and Eberron Forge of the Artificer. Okay, let's actually get going. I'm going to do this in a bit of a random order, since I think that's the best for discussion, so here's your table of contents. If there's any species that you're particularly interested in, feel free to skip around, and if it's not here, then it will be in the second video. For now though, I'm going to start us off light with a really basic one, the Dwarf. Species in D&D are always either medium or small, and the Dwarf here is an example of a medium species. There are pros and cons to each, but the main benefit of being medium is that you can grapple or shove large creatures. If that's something that you're likely to want to do at some point, which I think should probably be the case for basically all strength-based characters and monks, you probably want to be medium. Anyway, actual features. You get resistance to poison damage and advantage on saves against the poison condition. That's pretty good. Around 12% of the monster manual do some amounts of poison damage, and roughly 5% call for a saving throw against poison. You're going to have a lot of coverage with that feature. Further boosting your survivability is Dwarven Toughness, giving you +1 HP at each level. This actually sometimes has a secret second effect on certain builds which need to heavily multiclass and so have a very restrictive point buy, because it allows you to reduce your investment in Constitution whilst retaining the same amount of HP as any other character, meaning that it can actually represent about +3 extra points to put in other stats instead. Despite being half the effect of Tough though, I don't think that this is half as good as that feat. +2 HP instead of +1 is actually a very significant difference, and I'm much less likely to do that +3 extra points trick on a Dwarf. On the sensory end, Dark Vision to 120 feet is great, because most creatures only have 60 foot range, so you can get advantage on a lot of long-ranged attacks. And then the extremely unique feature of Stone Cunning, which gives 60 foot of Tremor Sense for 10 minutes, proficiency bonus times per day. Tremor Sense is incredibly weird, because it's not technically sight. If a creature is invisible, you still have disadvantage on attacks. You just always know where they are, assuming that they're standing on stone. What this is most useful for is scouting. If you're ever worried about someone sneaking up on you, or want to know how many people are on the other side of the door, stone cutting is one of the absolute best ways to do it. Now, I don't think that you're using the dwarf features all the time, but you fight poisonous creatures often enough that +1 HP will save you from time to time, and both stone cutting and 120-foot dark vision will come up on occasion, although probably not that often. Dwarf's features are mostly relevant in combat, where I think that they are fairly consistently good, with the exception of stone cutting, which instead has some very specific applications for scouting without line of sight. I unfortunately don't think that that will come up super often. As such, I'm going to put Dwarf in specific scenes, and I think that the HP and poison resilience are good enough to get them up to impactful. Nice and central for a solid mid-tier species. Get how the grid works? The further they are to the top and the right, the better. Okay, we've done a medium species, so let's go for a small species, the Halfling. The main benefits of being small are that you can run through the spaces of large enemies, medium-sized creatures can only run through if they are huge or bigger, and you can ride medium mounts. Weirdly, medium creatures tend to be some of the absolute best mounts, and are often more accessible through your character's build. For example, you can only ride your Beastmaster Ranger's primal companion if you're small, and there is of course my personal favourite, Fine Familiar Deer. If you want to know more about Deer Battlefield Supremacy, I have a great little video all about Fine Familiar for you. Anyway, if you want the mobility options of the medium mounts, you probably want to go for a small species like this Halfling. I will quickly say that I personally have a preference for small species, but overall I think that both medium and small are roughly equivalent, so I haven't actually taken size into consideration here. As for the Halfling's actual features, they get advantage against frightened saves. That's pretty nice, gives coverage over about 6% of the monster manual. They can hide behind medium or larger allies, which is circumstantially useful if you're going to be hiding a lot anyway. They can run through the spaces of anything medium or larger. This one is pretty interesting because that actually includes enemies. Halfling is the only species that can run through a medium enemy's space, although it does still count as difficult terrain. And finally, whenever they roll a 1 on a d20 test, they can re-roll it. That's any attack, check, or save that you ever do. So, how likely are you to get a useful activation out of that? Well, on a neutral roll, you'll roll a 1 5% of the time. That's your activation rate. For it to be useful though, you now need to succeed, meaning that the actual rate is based on what you need to roll on the face of the die. For now, let's assume that you need to roll an 11. That's a 50-50 chance, meaning that your useful activation rate is half of 5%, 2.5%. That's not great, but it is every single d20 you will ever roll, and across an entire campaign you're going to roll a hell of a lot of d20s, likely in the mid-hundreds, maybe even the thousands if it's an especially long campaign. The thing is, you can't choose when those useful activations are. If you remember, a min-roll attack that doesn't kill the goblin stops being a useful activation. And checking a chest for traps and not finding anything also isn't a useful activation, because it doesn't change what you are going to do next, open the chest. As such, the actual useful activation rate is probably less than 2.5%. There's actually some really weird interactions with advantage and disadvantage here, because you re-roll your 1s before you would resolve the advantage or disadvantage. For example, if you had disadvantage and you rolled a 1 and a 6, you would re-roll the 1, maybe got a 15, and then resolve the disadvantage and find out that the re-roll didn't matter, your result was a 6. For this, I need to bring out the graphs. First up, if you're rolling at neutral, you have this nice linear relationship. The lower the die phase that you need, the closer you get to a 5% activation rate. Note that there's 0 impact if you only needed to roll a 1 anyway, because the reroll can quite literally never matter. Next, let's add on advantage. You can only potentially get a benefit here if both of your dice failed and at least one of them was a 1. Because of that, you're exceedingly unlikely to get a useful activation for low DCs, since it's unlikely that both dice failed. But you're also unlikely at high DCs because it's improbable that the re-rolled die succeeded. Still slightly better than a roll at neutral though, simply because there's twice the chance that you're going to get to re-roll a 1 in the first place. Roughly, they're independent events. If we look at disadvantage though, you only get a benefit if the other die succeeded and your reroll also succeeds. that means that at low DCs, the probability almost doubles. Again, because either die can potentially trigger the reroll, and the other one is likely to have passed anyway. At high DCs though, luck is actually less likely to have a useful activation, because even if you get that reroll, the other die is likely to have failed. Anyway, that was a whole bunch of maths to basically say, lucky is fairly unlikely to have a useful activation, and because you have no power to control when that activation occurs, there's a reasonably good chance that it will be some random attack roll against a mook, or a fairly inconsequential ability check. The other features are also nice, but they aren't exactly earth-shattering. The Halfling features mostly just make doing stuff easier, whether that's hiding or rolling, rather than unlocking new options. And as such, I think that they can only go in convenient, and I simply don't think that they have a high enough probability to have a useful activation in more than some sessions. Convenient in some sessions. By the way, little Halfling tangent, one of my other DM friends actually has a player who decided that they don't want to use luck anymore, because the DM does some really funny critical fails on a 1, and they felt left out. Obviously, I'm not ranking social dynamics in this video, but it is something worth considering if you're that sort of player. Do you actually want to never roll a 1? Okay, moving on. Let's do an example of our secret third size type. The human gets to choose whether they are medium or small. This is objectively the best thing you can have in your species size line, because it means that you get to pick the benefit that you want, either the ability to shove and grapple large creatures, or the ability to walk through large creatures and use medium mounts. As for your features, you get a skill proficiency of your choice, always nice. You get heroic inspiration at the end of every long rest, giving you a free reroll on the first important fail of every day. That will come up a ton across your campaign, but the real draw of the human is that they get a second origin feat. Origin feats are really powerful and give you a whole bunch of customization. Some builds even rely on them to function at all. For example, I recently made a video about a rogue that straight up needed to have Zentrum Ruffian, but was also desperate for the extra defences of Tough. You can also take this the other way though, and just take 2 generically good origin feats like Musician and Lucky. There's a huge amount of flexibility in the human, and through these 2 origin feats you can really shape it to suit your build. This is our first species going in build defining, and I think that it's almost constantly useful. Okay, there's one more type of species that I want to cover before we dive into the deep end. Some species, like the elf, have a lineage feature which lets them pick one benefit from a list. Historically we've called these sub-races, but I'm going with lineages now because the in-game terminology has changed. With these lineages, I'm going to be considering them all separately, so there will be multiple cells on the grid that get filled in with elf. But if there is no or little difference between them, or they are just incredibly comparable, I may put multiple lineages together on the grid. You'll see what I mean as we dig in. So first up, they are medium only, so they are really good for grapplers, and they have 60 feet of dark vision, which is always nice. Either insight, perception, or survival proficiency. Perception in particular is always a big skill to look out for, and then they get advantage against the charmed condition and can't be put to sleep. That's actually pretty niche. When players see charmed and sleep, they think of hypnotic pattern and the sleep spell, but both of those are actually remarkably uncommon in the monster manual. I counted 3 monsters with sleep and only 2 with hypnotic pattern. Charmed in particular, without the additional rider of hypnotic pattern incapacitating you, is an exceptionally weak condition, which can often be pretty much ignored. There will be some other debilitating effects that this feature protects you from, but overall it is weak. Much more interestingly, they can long rest in just 4 hours and remain conscious throughout. That makes you ideal for keeping a lookout, or gives you an additional 4 hours in the day to do something else, like scribing spells or researching in the town library. This is actually a fantastic non-combat ability. Finally, we have our lineages: the Drow, High Elf, Wood Elf, Lorwyn Elf, and Shadowmoor Elf. All of these get a cantrip, a first level spell and a second level spell, all of which they can cast once for free or again if they have appropriate spell slots, as well as an additional feature, and these are what I'm going to be splitting them out on. First up, the Wood Elf. These guys increase their speed to 35 feet, for those who know why I'm specifying, that's a capital S, and then their spells are Druidcraft, Longstrider, and Pass Without Trace. Druidcraft isn't great, but Longstrider is absolutely fine, and Pass Without Trace is lovely. That will really support your entire party with stealth. Even if you don't have spell slots, Pass Without Trace is something that you often don't need more than once anyway. Back to that for 35 foot speed, it's really good. it lets you confidently outrun a lot of creatures or get in position way easier than another species would, without having to use any other actions. Longstrider boosting it up to 45 feet when required is also great. Literally everyone wants increased speed, it comes up so often. And a free pass without trace on top of that will get used every time you want to sneak around. On top of a reasonably powerful base species, I'm happy putting Wood Elf in Impactful. They're unlikely to swing encounters, but you will notice the effects of their features when you use them. As for the frequency, I think you can probably use the Wood Elf in most scenes. The speed is very good in combat, and the skills and stealth are good in exploration. It's only really social encounters that they're lacking in, impactful in most scenes. Next up we have the Drow that gets 120 feet of dark vision and access to Dancing Lights, Faerie Fire and Darkness. Faerie Fire is a decent low level spell but falls off quickly, Darkness has niche uses, and Dancing Lights isn't a great cantrip. But the real reason for taking this is that 120 foot dark vision. Like I discussed in the Dwarf, this is actually quite good on ranged builds, because most creatures only have 60 feet of dark vision. If you can see an enemy from a long range either at night or in a cave or something like that, this means that you can probably get a couple of turns of shooting with your longbow at advantage. The Shadowmoor Elf gets this 120 foot dark vision as well, although they swap out their spells for Starry Wisp, Heroism and Gentle Repose. Gentle Repose is a spell that I have actually seen cast twice ever, but Starry Wisp is a decent attack cantrip, and Heroism can actually represent a fairly significant amount of temporary hit points at low levels. I think that Drow and Shadowmoor are very comparable, essentially on equal footing, so I'm going to have them share a space on the grid. Now, where to put them? I think that they are without a doubt going in build dependent. You kind of need to be ranged to make use of their extended dark vision, and spells like Darkness need a feature like Devil's Sight to become especially strong. The problem is that most campaigns take place during the day. Furthermore, I think that you're probably better off with Dwarf's poison resistance and extra HP as opposed to Elf's charmed and sleep protection. However, they do get that 4-hour long rest. In a standard campaign, I don't think that you're going to get a useful activation in most sessions, because you won't be in the right conditions to use them. As such, I'm putting these two in build dependent in some sessions. If it's a campaign in the Underdark or you're fighting vampires a lot, I can see these two being a decent option though. Our last two lineages are the High Elf and the Lorwyn Elf, and again I'm going to be grouping them together because they are incredibly comparable. First up, High gets a Wizard cantrip of your choice, and Lorwyn gets a Druid cantrip of your choice, both of which you can change every long rest. On High, that could be True Strike, Blade Ward, Minor Illusion, or Mind Sliver, and on Lorwyn that could be Guidance, Shillelagh, Starry Wisp, or Thorn Whip. Several really good options both in and out of combat, and the ability to change them every day means that you can plan for the day ahead, so you will definitely be able to contribute. But if this is all you're looking for, I'd probably suggest just getting Magic Initiate instead. Where these two elves get really interesting are their high level spells. High Elf gets Detect Magic, a very strong information spell, which you'd probably want to have prepared anyway, and Misty Step, the best mobility spell in the game, usable both in and out of combat. Alternatively, Lorwyn gets Command, the best control spell in the game, and Silence, another very solid control option that you'd probably want to have prepared anyway. Silence also doubles up for some potential stealth implications. In both cases, you get an actual best in category spell and something else that you're incredibly happy with taking, even if it's just saving your party a prep slot. These are two incredible packages. However, the thing that makes Command and Misty Step so good are their spammability. If you're only casting Command once, that's not great. And as we'll see soon, there are other species that can bonus action teleport multiple times. High Elf and Lorwyn Elf are good specifically on casters, and access to a best in category spammable spell on a class that doesn't normally get it is absolutely huge. Alongside the fact that they can swap their cantrips to make sure that they are relevant for the day ahead, I think that that means that the High and Lorwyn Elves should make it all the way up to almost constantly powerful, but the reliance on additional spell slots means that I have to bring them down to build dependent. I'd be taking High on something like a Cleric or a Bard who doesn't normally get Misty Step, or Lorwyn on something like a Sorcerer who doesn't normally get Command. Fantastic species, two of the best in the game. While we're talking about elves, Eberron brought back the Half-Elf, or as they're now called, the Khoravar. Sorry for dead naming you all, apparently that's an actual thing, they don't like being called half-elves. Medium or small is nice, dark vision of 60 feet is nice, A floating skill or 2 proficiency is very nice, and then advantage against charmed and a legendary resistance versus saving throws against the unconscious condition specifically are near useless. The only real standout feature here is Fade Gift, which lets you choose any cleric, druid or wizard cantrip and swap them out every long rest. That's cool, but you could get basically everything you could possibly want on either High or Lorwyn. Sure, you can swap between Guidance and Rare Frost if you want, but how likely are you to want to do that? Unfortunately, the Khoravar just seems inferior to the other elves in almost every way. You can probably find a place to use those cantrips though. I'm putting Khoravar in Outclassed for most sessions. Okay, I had been putting it off until we got through all the different sizes and our first lineage split, but let's go back to where you probably thought I would start. The alphabetically first Aasimar. Huge amount of stuff in here, this is one of the longest species. So first up, you can either be small or medium. As I said on the human, this is great. It lets you choose the benefits that you want. Now for the actual features, we get resistance to both Radiant and Necrotic. This is the only species that we'll see which gets 2 resistances, which is honestly pretty wild. Excluding bludgeoning, piercing and slashing, Necrotic is the second most common damage type in the monster manual, with about 11% of monsters using it, and Radiant isn't too bad with 6% coverage. Obviously there's a bit of crossover with monsters that use both Radiant and Necrotic, but having resistance to at least some of the damage from around 17% of all monsters is kind of crazy. Dark Vision and the Light Spell then sort of accomplish the same goal, but they are useful in different circumstances, and you get once per day mini cure wounds. That's not great, but it's nice to have. The rest of the power budget exists in Celestial Revelation, and goddamn is this a feature. Once per day as a bonus action, you can go super mode for a minute and add your proficiency bonus to damage once per turn, and either frighten everything within 10 feet for a round, get a 10-foot aura that does your proficiency bonus and damage again to everything nearby, or just get a fly speed. Having access to an inbuilt fly speed is absolutely huge to any species. Obviously there's the combat application of just flying up when no one can touch you and shooting down with a bow. This is one of the best defensive options in the game, and the Aasimar even does extra damage while doing it, but there's also a ton of non-combat applications, like flying over the castle walls to sneak in, getting a vantage point to survey your surroundings, or taking a shortcut to intercept a fleeing thief. Unfortunately, you only get that 1 minute once per day, so you aren't likely to use your flight in most scenes, either because you're saving it for the oncoming fight, or because 1 minute isn't really enough to do what you want to do. With the 17% resistance and the emergency heal though, I don't think that I have any problem putting Aasimar in at least specific scenes, since one of those or your flight will likely come up in most combats. But what the flight does do is get them into game warping for specific scenes. With any cheap flight option, your DM needs to be thinking about how they're going to deal with you, so that you can't just waltz over their warriors who only have a 60-foot bow by outranging them from above. Aasimar is probably the weakest of the game warping options, but I think that they still qualify. In fact, I'm going to spoil the rest of the list now. The only thing that can get you into game warping is flight. I expect some of you will argue that it's not that big of a deal. I think it is. Cheap, concentration-free flight from pretty much any source does genuinely completely change the game, and requires DM attention. Now, that does not mean that I think Aasimar needs banning. I absolutely don't. Game warping is not the ban tier. But it does mean that an unprepared DM will have some of their challenges negated until they work out how to address your flight. Okay, now that you know my thought on flyers, let's talk about the other two, starting with Aasimar's PHP companion, the Dragonborn. These guys do have a lineage feature, but I'm going to group them all together and do a single Dragonborn ranking because they don't really change how you play the game. So you're medium only, you get Dark Vision 60 again, and then a resistance to either acid, cold, fire, lightning or poison. Fire and poison are the best ones with 10 and 12% coverage of the monster manual respectively. You also then get a breath weapon, which is a bit weird, but lets you replace an attack with a low damage AoE, say for half. If you have extra attack, you only need to give up one of those attacks, not both. It does scale like a cantrip though, so the damage becomes a little bit better at higher levels. This is something that I don't think you want to use all the time, just attacking normally is often better, but if you can fit a couple of enemies in the area, it could potentially be useful. It's also guaranteed damage, so it could be good for finishing off enemies. Finally, just like the Aasimar, the Dragonborn can use a bonus action to get a fly speed once per day, except theirs lasts for 10 minutes. That gives you a lot more range, and is definitely better than the Aasimar's 1 minute, but I don't think that it's significantly better, and the Dragonborn's other features are also just not as good as the Aasimar's. I can see there being sessions where flight is the only thing that you can use, but you will basically always use it, and the breath weapons become much better as you level up. As such, I'm going to put it in game warping for most sessions, just short of the Aasimar. This is right on the borderline though. If you think that it should be on par with the Aasimar, I can absolutely understand why. Right, those are the two PHB semi-flyers, so let's go on to the big baddie of Lorwyn, the Faerie. First up, small only, and very interestingly, you're a Fae creature type. There are a lot of features in D&D which only work on humanoids, such as whole person, but also some that only work on a list of non-humanoid creature types, such as protection from evil and good. Often this is considered to be a mostly neutral change, but I personally find that the humanoid targeting effects are a bit more common, so I see this as a very slight positive. Not enough to change how I rank it, but worth noting. You then get Druidcraft, Faerie Fire, and Enlarge Reduce. This is fine. Faerie Fire is useful early game, and Enlarge Reduce comes up from time to time. The big thing though is permanent flight speed, assuming you aren't wearing medium or heavy armour. This is why you play a Faerie. That feature alone is incredible. Unlike the Dragonborn and Aasimar, this is always on. You can always shoot from above, you can always sneak over the castle walls, it opens up the ability to do things like eavesdrop at windows or access locations that no one else can. I think most people probably know this, but permanent flight is completely busted in D&D. I am absolutely furious that they put it in unchanged. The Aasimar and Dragonborn can fly too, or you could even just cast the fly spell, but that uses a limited resource. If the Aasimar decides to use it out of combat, then sure, that means that they can't use it in the fight you have coming up afterwards. With a Faerie's permanent flight though, they can just continue to use it. A couple of minutes ago I said that I don't think that the Aasimar is worth banning because you can deal with it. Faerie I ban. It is the only species I ban. Using resources to complete challenges is the entire point of D&D, and the Faerie's permanent flight is a silver bullet to a hell of a lot of challenges, which uses no resource. As a DM, permanent flight is just incredibly unfun to prep for. Sure, you can do it, but absolutely everything needs to have a plan for the Faerie just flying over it. And so there is no doubt in my mind that Faerie is going in almost constantly game warping. Oh, there is also a feature in the Faerie which says that if you're from Shadowmoor you have 120 foot dark vision. I'm ignoring this and other features like it because I'm running under the assumption that most characters aren't from Shadowmoor. So, those are our 3 flyers. There is one more sort of flying adjacent species though, the Dhampir. Medium or small, that's great, then dark vision 60 feet and resistance to necrotic, which has 11% monster manual coverage. As for your movement options though, you have 35 foot speed, absolutely awesome. As I said on Wood Elf, this is fantastic and comes up way more often than you'd think. And they get always on spider climb, meaning that they can walk up walls and across ceilings with their hands completely free. That's incredibly strong. It lets you do a lot of the same things as the Faerie, simply going over obstacles, hanging out on building walls, or jumping on the ceiling and shooting down from above when nothing can touch you. But unlike the Faerie, you have to constantly be in contact with a surface. This seriously limits your angles of approach on stealth missions. You will probably still have to go through the path of a guard, and if you're outdoors or the ceiling isn't very high, then it's not that useful in combat. This is a terrain-dependent feature, and unlike permanent flight, I think that makes it fair. It is far more limited in scope, and so won't always be useful. The Dhampir does get one more feature though, their Vampiric Bite. This says that when you deal damage with an unarmed strike, you can instead do 1d4 plus con piercing damage, and proficiency times per day either heal yourself by the damage dealt, or add that number to your next attack roll or skill check. This has a lot for us to talk about. So first up, that damage. The unarmed strike itself uses your strength for the attack roll, but the damage is based on constitution. That means that you need to have a high modifier in both of these stats to really benefit from it. Now, the first thing that you probably think of when you hear the words unarmed strike is the monk. They get to use dexterity for both attack and damage rolls, and they also get to use a larger die. Is Dhampir insane on the monk? Unfortunately, I don't think so. You definitely do get to use dexterity for the attack roll, no questions there, but I think that the damage roll remains as 1d4 plus con. 2 reasons for that, and they're a bit technical. Firstly, martial arts replaces the normal damage of your unarmed strike. The Vampiric Bite states that it is instead of the normal damage. Vampiric Bite is specifically not the normal damage of an unarmed strike, and so martial arts cannot replace that damage. Furthermore, the Drain and Strengthen abilities activate when you deal this damage. That is in reference to the 1d4 plus con piercing damage. If you replace that with another damage roll, say 1d8 plus dex, it no longer counts as this damage, so you cannot use Drain or Strengthen. I don't think that Monk works here. Having said that, I don't think that it's a major problem if you allow it. The benefits a Monk can get from this are just good, they aren't amazing, and they are limited in use. But going back to our no Monk assumptions, where is this useful? I think it's basically never useful in combat. I ran a lot of numbers a few years ago on the 2014 Dhampir, and combat bites for attack roll boosting are almost always negative, break even in the extreme cases. The heal is also very low, an absolute last resort. Where this shines is out of combat, using Strengthen to boost ability checks. If you have plus 2 con, this is an average of plus 4.5 to any ability check, proficiency times per day. That's really good, basically a buffed self-only guidance, although it does require you to have a target to bite. Assuming you don't have a bag of rats, this will typically have to be a party member. One of your allies will have to give you a bit of HP to add to a skill check. That's fun roleplay right there, and is probably worth it in the long run. You can also use this on a pet like a primal companion or a familiar, which is probably easier for your party to take. Just like the spider climb though, you can't always use this. If you're going to be talking to the king, you can't bite your ally before making a persuasion check, because you'll have just bitten your ally in front of the king. However, between the increased speed, spider climb, resistance, and ability check boost, I reckon that the Dhampir can probably contribute in the vast majority of encounters, only really struggling when in open terrain or in public. And the spider climb in particular enables some really cool stuff that you simply would not be able to do otherwise. I think that it gets comfortably into builder defining in most scenes. I freaking love the Dhampir. Unfortunately though, that's where I'm going to end this video. Part 2 will come out in probably 2 or 3 weeks, so make sure to subscribe for that. Although if you want to listen to it right now, there's an audio-only version already on my Patreon Discord. If you want to learn about the awesome stuff that Changeling gets to do, or how Goliaths like Walt can suplex Tiamat whilst SK, Mark Rainbow, Biney, Jaleli, Precipice, Jars, Not Curtis and Dreamscribe repeatedly stomp on her toes, why not come and join us? If you enjoyed all about Halfling maths, here's a video all about the maths behind the monster manual. Bye!